So now he says, okay, now vayashuva hamalachim al Yaakov. So now these angels come back to Yaakov, and they say, your brother's coming towards you with 400 men. 400 is a very mystical number. 400. Chazal tell us about the number. About the number 400 is the letter Tav, and Yaakov Avinu became scared. He became frightened because he thought that maybe the judgment against Esav wouldn't hold. Maybe he wouldn't come out positive in the judgment. And he began to do what Chazal tell us are the three things that every single person has to do in life whenever they're challenged. Sorry, the people on YouTube, the connection just died, so I had to restart it. So whenever that happens, if I stop the share in the middle, then just have a little patience and go back on, and hopefully it'll stay. So three things that we have to make: three levels of hishtadlus, three levels of efforts in any kind of challenge. Level number one, we have to pray. That's the first thing you must do. Level number two, you have to try to find merit and try to. In this case, Yaakov tries to give a gift. And level number three, you have to be prepared to fight. You have to be prepared. So the first level of hishtadlus is always prayer. Again, the first level of effort is always to pray. That's really the only level of effort that really works. The only reason that we have to do hishtadlus after that is because Hashem wants to cover up His miracles of interfering in our life with something that could hide it. So that's the concept of hishtadlus, of making effort. The effort itself, the hishtadlus itself, doesn't produce the effect. The hishtadlus is just, we do hishtadlus. This is a very hard thing for regular people to comprehend. I'm not telling you, and I'm not expert in this. The hishtadlus that a person has to do is only as a camouflage, so that God can sneak in, so to speak, the blessings in the person's life. So Yaakov Avinu made two levels of hishtadlus in the physical world, and one level of hishtadlus in the spiritual world. The level of hishtadlus in the spiritual world, he prayed, and then he made a gift. Right? He gave a present, and then he was ready to fight. Chazal tell us that what was Yaakov afraid of? What was one of the things that Yaakov was afraid of in this confrontation with Esav, is because Esav had 20 years of the mitzvah of kibbut av va'em more than Yaakov did. And we know that later on, Yosef Atzadik is 22 years he's away from Yaakov and his father, and that's those 22 years, because it took 2 years till Yaakov comes back now to Yitzchak Avinu. So all of those years, could you imagine? Esav was who he was. Esav was a wicked person, but he had the mitzvah of kibbut av va'em 20 years more than Yaakov, who was absent for 20 years. And you might say, but Yaakov Avinu was only absent for those 20 years because, and so there are many different answers. The parents told him to go and get a wife. They didn't tell him to stay 22 years for 20 years, or 22 years. And so he was worried about that. And that's what we're, on a certain level, that's what we're suffering through right now in the world, is that the nations of the world, just like the Torah says, that when we came into the land of Israel, we had to wait 4 generations from the time that we left Israel till the time we came back to Israel. Right? Yaakov Avinu left. 4 generations later, they came back. Why? Because the goyim in the land of Israel, had actual merits. There were certain merits to them, and they had to get paid back and rewarded for their merits, even though they were wicked. But Hashem doesn't ever take away the merit of someone who does something good, even if the majority of the person is wicked. But the rest of the person, whatever mitzvah, whatever good deeds the person does, is on his honor. And so they were paid back. They were allowed to live in the land of Israel for those 4 generations. Because anyway, we weren't ready anyway to come back. So, okay, so now let's talk about, and he also made the other hishtadlus of dividing the family in half, and we see that the Midrashim tell us, of course, that Yosef Atzadik went in front of his mother, Rachel Imenu. Rachel Imenu was then pregnant with Binyamin Hatzadik, and he wanted to protect her because she was so beautiful still that he was afraid that Esav would say, okay, you have all these wives, give me one. And he would have picked Rachel as the wife. So Yosef Atzadik, who was the one who could have battled with Esav, he stood in front of him. And we know also that before they met, Yaakov Avinu had his name changed to Yisrael, right? And we said before, the Yisrael is a higher level. Yisrael is on a higher level. Yisrael means he fought with an angel. None of us could fight with an angel. We have a real angel that's outside of us. We could never even imagine. If we would even see one, we would probably die from fear. But we can barely fight with the angel that's inside of us, which is a little tiny piece of the angel, of the outside angel, right? We each have a Yetzer Hara, and we are struggling with our own internal angel, and that's a tiny, tiny, tiny angel compared to the totality of what that angel is. That angel, the Yetzer Hara, is also the angel of death. It's also all the negativity, and so Yaakov was able to fight that angel, and that was the angel of Esau. So later on, when he sends again angels, he tells Esau, "I fought with your angel," and Esau, it was to make him afraid. It was to make him afraid because Esau understood what angels were, and if Yaakov was able to fight with an angel, first of all, even to see an angel. Okay, in those days they saw angels. Even Hagar saw an angel. She saw a low-level angel. And I'm sure that Esau saw low-level angels, but not high-level angels. So if you've ever seen, I think did we speak about this last week? About that, if you look in some Hasidic Sfarim, Sizurim, in Shabbos, the Shabbos davening by Hodu say, "La'osi niflat לעושה נפלאות גדולות לבדו כאילו למחזו, שיחה המלך הנורי כאילו למחזו, Og Melch Moshan Kilo Lamchaso. You know what I'm talking about? Those, we say that on Shabbos. So if you look at a certain Sidurim, next to each of those psukim of Kilo Olam Chasto has the names of angels in alphabetical order. And sometimes there's 2 angels per pasuk because there's a discussion, there's a discussion of who the angels for each pasuk, who are the angels. So they put them both angels, the names of both angels, and every single angel has God's name in it. Even the angel of death. The angel of death, the way you write their name is Samach Mem Aleph Lamed. We don't want to say it. That's the angel of death. That's the Yetzer Hara. And they call it the Samach Mem. But his last name, the second part of his name, is Aleph Lamed, with Hashem's name. All angels have Hashem's name in it, except for the highest angel. And the question is, why? And the answer is something very interesting. You know that in the olden days, people who were Mekubalim, or they knew how to speak to angels. It's not a good idea at all to speak to angels, because if you summon an angel, if you happen to figure out how to do that by reading one of these online Kabbalah books, which you shouldn't be reading, and which are not authentic, and which are not, you're not ready to hear that. So, but sometimes they'll give you they'll have translated something from a Kabbalah book into English, and they'll give you a formula how to summon an angel. I caution you against that with every caution, Because if you do that, the angel could be so angry that you did that they could just destroy you. They have permission to do that. So, but all the angels have Lamed in their name. Why? Why? Because in biblical times, they knew how to deal with angels. In fact, they actually knew the schedule of angels when they appeared in the world. In fact, it's written in our Sfarim that, for example, the angel Michael, there are certain angels that their names were allowed to say because they became accepted names within the Jewish people. So the angel Michael, his time where he's running around the world doing whatever he does, is from dawn until chasar, until middle of the day. That's his time. And so middle of the day. Towards the end of the day, the person doesn't feel well, the person feels weak, but the beginning of the day, they have a little bit more strength. And so the Kabbalists ask the question, why is the angel Michael, who's not in charge of healing, hanging around the world? It's his hour from dawn to midday, when it really should be the angel Raphael. And the answer, oh my God, there's a reason I'm telling you this, even though we don't have anything to do with angels. But the reason is because Hashem said, I don't want anyone to pray to angels. In olden days, they did that. That was part of their idolatry, is they knew how to access angels. They knew how to access certain powers in this world that Hashem created. And they directly turned to those powers instead of turning to Hashem. I also want to talk about this week in the Parsha, the power of Hitbodedut, of Hisbodedus, of talking to Hashem in your own language. There are 3 levels of prayer. The Siddur prayer, which includes making a bracha before you eat and after you eat. The prayer that we say in Tehillah, Torah. He didn't, people think that Rabbi Nachman was the one who was Mechadesh, that he brought back this concept into the world. He didn't. He just reminded us of Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov and David and Melech. Everybody was always talking to Hashem. And they talked to Hashem in their own language. Now that we have a siddur, we sometimes forget. We have the standardized prayer. We sometimes forget that we also have to do personalized prayer. Because we forgot that, and we just did the standardized prayer in the siddur, or sometimes we'd also do the standardized prayer of the Tehillim, we neglected the personalized prayer. And so Rabbi Nachman came to remind us about that. In our parsha, Yaakov Avinu speaks to Hashem so beautifully when he speaks directly. First, he speaks in a hidden way to Hashem. Now, Yaakov says to God, Elokei Avi Abraham, Elokei Avi Yitzchak, Elokei Avi Hashem Haomer Elai Shuv La'artzecha. He's speaking to Hashem, and he gives him the titles. He gives him names. He says, "You're the God of my father, and the God of my grandfather, and you're the one who told me to go back to the land of Israel, where I was. Promise me that you're going to make things good for me." Hashem, I feel so unworthy of all the gifts that you gave me. Look rich I am. Remember how Yaakov Avinu was rich. He came to marry his wives, and he was robbed of everything that he had. He had nothing, right? So this is how his brothers went. First of all, he addresses Hashem. He calls out to Hashem. And we, sometimes we begin our personal prayer with Ribono Shel Olam. If you speak in English, Master of the world, Hashem, whatever, however you begin your conversation with God. So Yaakov Avinu, he begins it calling out to, in other words, introducing himself or calling to God. And he uses the names that he felt close to and that he felt were relevant. And then he says, thank you. The first thing he says is, thank you. Thank you for everything you've given to me. And then he says, please, Hatzileni na, please, save me. Miyad achi, miyad Esav. Ki yarei anochi, otzo. Save me from my brother, from Esav, because I'm afraid of him. Pen yavo v'hikani ema banim. I'm afraid that he's going to kill my whole family. Yaakov Avinu was not afraid to say to Hashem, I'm afraid. Help me, I'm afraid. But this is before David HaMelech, right? Yaakov Avinu was the ancestor of David HaMelech, was the grandfather of David HaMelech. And he's teaching us how to pray. He says, first address Hashem, and then thank him, and then be real and say what you need. Hatzilena, save me, save me. And remember, the Meforshim say, Miyad Achi Miyad Esav. Save me from Esav, whether he's acting like a brother to me, whether he's nice to me, or Miyad Esav, or whether he's really Esav. Sometimes our enemies are much more dangerous when they're making believe that they're friends, tries to make believe that they're friends with you. And then he says, you promised me. You promised me, Hashem, that you're going to do good for me. And you promised me, Hashem. You promised me that you're going to take care of me. That's his whole prayer. And when I read it, it's a funny thing. Sometimes, I don't know how to explain this. I used to be a person, when I was younger, I was always looking for these deep Kabbalistic commentaries and, explaining about all the worlds and about all the deepest stuff. And sometimes if you just read the simple shot of the pasuk, you get the greatest Kabbalah. Here we see how Yaakov Avinu formulated his own private prayer to God. Hole is, how it is when you're by the beach and you dig a hole and then all the other sand, the hole. Like there's so much sand at the beach that even if you scoop out some sand, more sand will fill up that hole. So too, that's how it is. That's how it was with Yaakov's wealth. He was so wealthy that even though he away so much, he still had it repopulated itself. It enriched itself, and also with the Jewish people. When we lose, so that's how we should pray to Hashem. We call out to Him. We say Hashem. We introduce Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, Tata, Abba Shabashamayim. However you begin your prayer. Sometimes you could begin your prayer with Hashem Sfatay Tiftach. If you're trying to get into davening, sometimes you say, Hashem, open my mouth, let me pray to you. And then you say thank you first. All the thank yous. Then you say please, you scream out, help. And then you're allowed to say, Hashem, you promised me. I trust you. Help me to trust you. Help me to trust you. Every single parak of Tehillim, except for one, in the entire book of Tehillim, ends on a positive note. Except for Peichet, every single parak ends, even if he's calling it in the greatest distress. David HaMelech always says, "V'ani b'chastecha batachti." I'll trust you, Hashem. So that's how Yaakov Avinu teaches us to do our tefillah. Okay, in this week's parsha, of course, since I'm a Rachel Imenu, I always have to say, since I'm Rachel, and my name named after Rachel Imenu, I always have to tell us about. In this week's parsha, Rachel Imenu gives birth to Binyamin, and then she dies. And she knew that was going to happen to her. Why? Because she knew that they kept all the halachot, and she knew that in the land of Israel, you can't be married to two sisters at the same time. So when she gave, people don't realize this, when she gave Leah the simanim, and she knew that Leah was going to marry Yaakov Avinu, she knew that she was, even if she, maybe had a hope that in Chutz La'aretz he could marry her also, but she knew that, and one of them would have to leave. So the Rav Kitov in the Sefer Parshiyot calculates that Rachel Imenu was 36 when she passed away, and that Leah Imenu lived for 6 more years, and she was 42 when she passed away. And then after that, Bilhah passed away, and the one who stayed with Yaakov the longest, his entire life, and went down to Mitzrayim with him and took care of him was Zilpah, the one that we hear the least about, the one that we know the least about, the one that Leah Imenu, she was the youngest of all of them, because remember that when when Lavan tried to make that trick, so he gave Zilpah, who was the youngest Shifcha, the youngest in the family, he gave her to Leah when he was trying to masquerade that Leah was Rachel. So the youngest in the family to the younger daughter. So Zilpah was the one. Thank you, Elaine, Ilana. Hi, Rebbetzin Rachel, Rebbetzin Yehudis, and Rebbetzin Marcel. All the Rebbetzins here. Thank you for coming to class. Sorry, all the YouTube people that the connection kept going off and on. I don't even know if this was recorded. We'll see afterwards if it was. Everybody should have a good day and good Shabbos. Bezrat Hashem.